So we were talking about this, again, recollection, story is too weak a word, of the guy who was sentenced to death came back, and you're holding him while he cried and talked. I'm sort of hearing more about the context in which that event took place, and knowing a little more about the context, I think, could also be helpful to see sort of how does this where does this fit in to the arc that we're talking about. So you were in where that was happening was a hospital for the criminally insane.
It was a state hospital, and it had a unit that was maximum security.
Okay.
So it was a
hospital for the criminally insane.
It was a state mental hospital.
State mental hospital
that had a unit for the criminally insane, and the criminally insane unit was maximum security.
Okay.
So the others weren't, they were minimal security. They were just basic units, and they were locked at night and so forth, and people walked around the hospital grounds. So it was, most people just came and went. But this had concertina wire, 3 levels of fences, electric, etc., just like prison.
Right.
So it looked like a prison, felt like a prison, and you came and went through lots of gradations of security. And there were guards and so forth. It was broken down into so many years, I don't remember. There was probably a dozen units of approximately 16 to 20 patients in each.
And one unit for the maximum security guys?
No, this was 20 units of maximum security.
Oh, wow.
But each unit, this is the one unit. Within the building, there were 16 units.
And your position on that unit was as a teacher?
It was an SBH, severe behavioral handicap. The state was required to teach anyone up until 821 if they wanted to go to school, and we had 18 to 21-year-olds, including much older people and so forth, any age. So I was hired to be a teacher, but I was also assigned to a unit, and on the units you had the complete interdisciplinary team. You had a teacher, a social worker, a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a nurse, and then you had the aides. And the aides were, there was a half a dozen or more aides assigned to each unit, and they were there 24/7. We as professional staff worked 8 to 5, 5 days a week.
So the aides, they were not professional folks, they were just folks hired to...
Right. I call them frontline staff in the trenches. They dealt with the patients day in and day out, whereas we came and went. Right. And I would, there was a classroom where the students would come to me, but on the unit, we acted as a team, so we all conferred about all the patients. So what's your observation of Joe? How's he doing? Let's advance his treatment plan. Let's have a conversation with him to support his understanding of the treatment plan that we came up with, or how he wants to amend it for his sake.
So your hang on a second, let me figure out what I wanted to say next. And you had already a special ed degree when you went into that job?
Yes.
Right. So after this sort of interim period that you'd been through from the time you left New Mexico, come back to Dayton, bookstore, this, that, kids, not to go in the same category as all the rest of that, you'd gone back and gotten this special ed degree, and now you came to this job with that degree as a teacher in this rather challenging context, this environment. Now,
I'll correct you. I don't want to, for the record, a special ed degree, it wasn't quite like that. I had an undergraduate degree from Central State, and because of certain state laws that were evolving during the 70s, there was a rush to certify people as special ed.
Oh, okay.
So I took extra classes to become certified
as special ed.
So I eventually went and got a master's in special ed, but at that point in time, I didn't have a unique degree for that. So that's just a minor little aside.
Right, that's okay. So you'd said earlier, and I don't remember exactly in what context, that when you were on this team, or when you had this team, the level of incidents, the level of violent incidents, which presumably that's the kind of thing that can happen in that kind of maximum security prison for the criminally insane, went from a pretty high number, whatever it was, to nothing, to zero. So I want to explore sort of how that happened and your role in it. This sort of abstracts from the particular story about the crying, death-sentenced patient to the environment in which you were working more generally. So the first question would be, you came on as a teacher, and you were there as a teacher, but you eventually became the team leader of that unit that you just described. And to maybe talk a little bit about how that happened, and then what you did when you were team leader.
So it was an interdisciplinary team, which was a term that often these situations, these kind of environments have. And somebody's got to be the leader that calls the meetings and tries to help with the focus and facilitates and so forth. There's no definitive position description for what the team leader does. We had at some point lost our team leader, moved to another unit, whatever. I don't recall. One of the aides just looked at me and said, "Well, why don't you do it, Tom?" So I didn't see myself as having been there long enough to take on that kind of role, but I did. I accepted it. And what I had noticed was that this was an environment where there was a perception that there wasn't a lot of collaboration between the professional and the non-professional staff, or between the hospital administration and the staff. And I don't know if it was a typical civil service environment, which we don't need to go into, but this was a civil service environment. And it was my assessment that maybe 40 to 60% of the staff weren't very highly functional. And I'm including professional staff in that. So it was it's called a demoralized environment.
Okay.
And that was sad to me, because these patients needed every ounce of effort at our best. They needed all that. They were suffering and in pain. Plus, it was a dangerous environment. If you didn't really have your act together, if you could get hurt, or someone else could get hurt, or a patient could get hurt. And it did happen. It happened. It wasn't, epidemic, but it did happen. And when it did, it was traumatic for everybody. Just before I was hired on, a woman had been stomped to death by a patient, a nurse. So this isn't a place where you could be less than at your optimum, on guard, and therapeutic at your best, as far as I was concerned. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why everybody didn't have that attitude, but some people didn't. I think some people did in the beginning, and they've just kind of burned out because they didn't get the collaboration or the support from the system at a level where it needed to be. And so when I was asked to be, or it was suggested that I be the team leader, I put my name in, and they said, fine. Nobody else wanted to do it. And so what we were able to do over a period of time is support each other, listen to each other as far as what we needed as staff, listen to the front line, the aides, as to what they needed, because a good percentage of them, I thought, were not listened to. They weren't part of the dialogue, the conversation about what we do with these patients. They, in fact, saw the patients a lot more than the professional staff did. Mm-hmm. And so, if we could value their opinion, or help them understand what they should look for, they could be of great benefit to us. And I think we created an environment where, yes, the aides need to be at the meeting. and then they became part of the dialogue, and they would then transfer that information they learned to the other aides when they would, work with them. And so we created a collaborative environment where we had the lowest incidence rate of violence on our unit of any of the units in the hospital.
After you took over as
After I took over as team leader. Mm-hmm. So, given what I just said, was it me that did it? I'll take some credit for it, but I saw what was going on. I was asked to take part in leadership, and I proceeded to do the things that I thought needed to be done. Bring everybody's voices in, have regular meetings, actually attend to what you're supposed to do in a meeting, look at treatment plans, talk to the people that were supposed to be doing the social narratives, were supposed to be doing the psychiatric medication prescribing, supposed to do the counseling and so forth, and see what they were doing and help them do it. And then help give feedback and get feedback from them, so that the conversation was raised to a much more effective level.
So, in terms of what you did after moving into that team leader position, let me just put a kind of an overlay on it. It's possible to imagine that moving into that position, having observed what you had observed in terms of people not being totally functional on the staff, and this one not talking to that one, or not listening to this one, or not coming to meetings, you could have sort of implemented a kind of new regime of structure and control and accountability to you as team leader that would be intended to sharpen everybody up on their job and to sharpen the overall unit in its performance. But it sounds like that's not what you did. That what you did was, I'm not going to analogize it exactly to the recollection about the death sentence guy, but what you did was to look for ways of including everybody in the conversations about treatment plans and functions and information, making those conversations more inclusive in terms of who was having them, and more comprehensive in terms of all the information that was getting shared. So it seems like there was, and again, I'm reading into this.
Yeah, you're reflecting quite a bit that I said. So okay. You're still being true to what I said.
I'm not going out of the boundaries.
You're not interpreting too much.
Okay.
No.
So it was more of finding out what would be a supportive work method, rather than top-down directives to everybody to do what you think they needed to do based upon your diagnosis of what the situation was at that time.